We've been doing this podcast for 2.5 years now, and the most listened to episodes are always the ones talking about career and certifications in Treasury. So we decided to partner up with the AFP, the Association for Financial Professionals, so we can offer you a $100 discount code on all of the AFP's products. This includes, of course, the CTP, the Certified Treasury Professional, which is hands down the most renowned and recognized certification in Treasury out there. And of course, the access to the CTP exam prep platform as well. Check the link in the description to access to those discount codes and take your career to the next level.
So, Sloane, thank you so much for coming on the show. Could you quickly start by going through what AI is, just as a general topic to set the scene? I think most people have heard of it by now. It's quite famous nowadays. But take us through the basics. What is AI and the different types?
Yeah, so I mean, really simply, AI is a computer simulation to try and replicate, human intelligence. How far along we are in that is a tremendous debate. My personal thoughts is we have a very, very long way to go. But I think the recent developments, particularly in the generative AI world, and in particular computer vision and NLP, which I'll get into in a second, have really just created an absolute buzz in the world, and especially in the business world, folks are keenly paying attention as tools that can honestly really change the landscape a lot. I see some really positive things. I think things can go wrong too, but again, that's another topic. But it's absolutely amazing technology. We are able to create things without having a person actually create it. The computer's creating it based on things that it's learned, and that's like that a very layman's term. And for the record, I am not in my background is understanding AI, but I don't sit and do the coding behind any of it. I don't make any of those. I can understand a lot of it and have a lot of conversations with our R&D team on the technicalities, but at the end of the day, nobody is going to ask me to train their transformer for them. We can get into what that means.
Yeah, so explain that. So you mentioned people, computers making things without humans. Is that's generative AI, right? So can you go through, let's say, what are the popular types?
Yeah, so first off, generative AI is kind of a funky term. It's not an official kind of AI. It's something that we've sort of in this landscape of ChatGPT and things like Midjourney and DALL-E that people have ascribed to these types of computer programs that can create things. So ChatGPT falls under what we would call natural language processing. So natural language processing is basically where there's a whole corpus of data that a computer system, a program, whatever you want to call it is. So it's basically where you have a platform that can ingest this big corpus of data. And from that corpus of data, it basically understands all of these different patterns. So when you ask a question, right, and this is the example to use right here is ChatGPT. You put in a question, it's going to use a predictive statistical model to tell you what word should come next. So based on all these previous words, here's what I think the next word is going to be, which means it can create some really, really funky things. That's another fun topic for discussion. So natural language processing falls under that generative AI moniker that has been used. That's one part of it. Another kind of generative, quote unquote, generative AI is computer vision. So those of you who, let's say you have, this is Treasury, right? So we've got people who do AP and are dealing with all sorts of invoices coming in electronically and not electronically. There are programs out there that can literally read what is coming over on a PDF, for example, and take all of that data, remove the complete layer of data entry so that all of it is about understanding, okay, is this the right thing? Did it grab the right PO? Is it going to the right, owner for this particular vendor, that kind of thing. So being able to read. So Actually, that's technically not generative AI. So generative AI, the other piece of it is something like an image creation, right? Generative AI is Midjourney, DALL-E. You can put in a prompt and it's gonna take that text, pull it apart and then put it back together as an image. Anybody who hasn't played with those tools, I highly recommend you do. They are fun. You can play with them for free. Although I know Midjourney is getting harder and harder to play with for free because the bandwidth's always getting used up. But it's a whole lot of fun to just create an image just out of your own text. And I don't know if anybody's paid attention to it, but there have been some really and very controversial things out there where people have won, art awards creating digital art from AI. It's wild, but very, very cool, very, very controversial, big topic to discuss on the ethics of that all, but very amazing stuff out there. So those are the two main kinds of generative AI, which tends to be what most people talk about when they're talking about AI today. Computer vision is another one, another kind of AI, very, very important, again, for those AP folks out there, being able to read invoices that come in through PDFs or through even hard copy that you turn into a PDF, be able to read them, take all your data entry and put them right into your system without any human intervention, although you always want to check, make sure that it's going to the right thing, grab the right thing, grab the right PO, grab the right budget owner, that kind of a thing. And then I think another very important kind of AI that's relevant to this Treasury team here is machine learning. So machine learning, some people don't consider it AI. I don't personally know why. It's AI. Basically, it's where you're taking data and you're making inferences from that data and continuing patterns. So things like predictive analytics fall under machine learning. There's many, many, many other applications of it. But for this particular crew, that's sort of where it would fall into.
Super cool. So you touched on it a little bit there. How are these technologies being used in Treasury today, and how is it changing the way treasurers work? So thinking of things like cash flow management, capital management, hedging, risk management, third-party risk management, all these areas where treasurers are their main concerns. How is AI revolutionizing that?
Yeah, so first off, I'll say I'm not a Treasury expert. I've worked in it tangentially, and as a finance and accounting person, and having worked in very broad range of kinds of companies, I've been exposed to lots of different kinds of cash management, but certainly wouldn't, my experience in Treasury pale in comparison to most people listening to this podcast. So I'll put that disclaimer out there. That said, there are so many applications based on what you've just said of what people are doing today and what they will start doing in the future. So what I actually just touched on before in terms of machine learning, I think that's a really, really important topic. You're talking about cash flow forecasting, right? If you want to help understand what is going on in just your data, right? You can use a predictive analytical model that can forecast out your cash, right? Now, it's useless without human intervention. I'll say that about 1,000 times probably in this podcast. You really need to understand all the things that will change in your business. You're never going to be able to get that 100% right in a predictive analytic model. But that is absolutely already being used in large companies today with, I think, some really, really fantastic results. You want to double check your forecasts. You want to make sure that you haven't missed a pattern somewhere. You want to see if there are anomalies somewhere that you haven't noticed just in your own analysis. AI is certainly a way that you can do it. And I think that's true in finance, well beyond Treasury. But for cash, it's obviously extremely crucial. Make sure you're not missing out on patterns that are already in your data. It's huge. And I'm sorry, you said other things. I want to make sure I cover those too.
No, that's perfect. So those are quite interesting examples. You started talking about AI with generative AI. Can you provide us with a few practical examples of actually how we understand how AI could help, but how generative AI could have useful applications in Treasury?
Oh, absolutely. I think generative AI is a little bit of a different it's a little different, right, than other kinds of AI. You're working on creating something. So there's so many applications, whether it's setting policies or maybe you have, I don't know, if you have AR staff that's doing collections and need to send emails, personalized emails out, like you can use all kinds of generative AI to help you filter through some of that and actually access your, the recipients that you need to actually access to collect that cash. You also can help, you can also do things like, if there are tools that it's going to end up being a shameless plug for Datarails here, but there are tools out there where you can actually connect your data in and then start asking questions about your particular data. So if you wanted to understand a trend or you wanted to understand, I don't know, how your receivables looked versus your, payables or something like that, and you're starting to try and think about how you're modeling things out, using generative tools like that would absolutely help you in that process, and also be able to answer questions quickly. I know we'll talk about it more, but one of the use cases for Datarails is for the FP&A genius that we have, for example, is being able to quickly get an answer to something that you just haven't prepared for. I sat on about a gazillion board meetings where you have spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours preparing, and you will still be asked something that you're just like, oh no. And then you're stuck trying to figure out what the answer is while everybody else is talking to the CEO and the chairman of the board, and you're sort of kept out of it and have homework to do where everybody else is sort of just doing the actual work of being in the room.
Is one of the recommendation application of Treasury is that live in the boardroom, when they ask you something about the Treasury report that you haven't prepared, you can just ask Generative AI and boom, project it on the screen. That will be
with the right tools. Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you think about being able to have access to your data in a very easy, quick, fast way, this is what generative tools are going to start to do. There's obviously a lot more behind it than just generative AI. Which is, again, why you need, specific tools that are built for it. Would not recommend using ChatGPT, although you technically can. So unless you're using enterprise ChatGPT, which now is a pretty new development, I don't have experience with it, so I'll put that disclaimer on it. But you can, if you wanted to use enterprise ChatGPT, you could. You're not going to have full access to your data set. Right. So whatever, if you want to understand the long range of your cash flow, you're only going to have access to whatever data you upload to ChatGPT. If you're not using the enterprise version, your data, your very sensitive data that you do everything in the world to protect, will be used to train their model. And then, someone else asks a prompt, they ask what your company's whatever is, and all of a sudden they know. So don't ever do that, short of them changing their policies. I do think they might have an opt-out now, but I think the best practice is, if you're using ChatGPT or similar, do not put anything private on there. So from a business application, especially from a finance application, it's very important that you look at your data privacy, your data security, make sure that you're not going to release your private information out into the wild.
So is that the main reason why you wouldn't use ChatGPT? Is it just the data protection? So you said, if you're in that situation where you're in the boardroom, you don't know something, don't use Chat. You can use a generative AI to get that, but we had a little joke about don't use ChatGPT.
Explain why. Don't use ChatGPT in the boardroom, because first of all, you won't have time to set it up. It'll actually take you longer to use something like ChatGPT. You need to have a specific tool that's basically already been set up with your data. So when you're querying it, you get a quick answer. If you're sitting in a boardroom trying to ask ChatGPT, it's not going to know any of your stuff. So you're going to be spending a long time doing, setting that up.
So it's too generic.
It's way too generic. Great. Yeah. Way too generic. And also, again, your data, if you have proprietary data, unless you're using enterprise ChatGPT, be very, very cautious about where you send your data.
So don't put your company forecast that's not public into ChatGPT and ask it questions. Very clear. Good to know.
And if you want to share with the world, have at it. But I think most people listening probably aren't.
Yeah, awesome. So take us into AI for cash flow forecasting specifically. So how can you use AI for cash flow forecasting, and what would be the pros and cons?
Yeah, so again, most likely you'd be using machine learning for forecasting. So basically where AI is analyzing your data, it's identifying patterns, and then it's using statistical models to basically create a forecast for you. So there's the pro to this is you are, first of all, going to get a fast answer, right? To, whatever it is that you're looking for. You want a very quick, one of those things, like just trying to get the direction and make sure that we see what we see. It'll also help you catch if there's patterns in your data that you're not aware of, right? Because you can't possibly look at everything. Unfortunately, I think most people probably don't want to look at every line of transaction. I have to guess. I certainly don't. So that's definitely a pro to it. And then the con of it is that these models are never going to fully understand what's going on in your business. When you're doing forecasts, you have to understand what business changes are happening, right? And while you can build that into some of your predictive models, it's probably not enough and probably misses some of the nuances. So I personally think that it's very, very important to have the Treasury, the human intervention, finance and Treasury intervention there, because you're going to look at it and you're going to be like, oh yeah, but we have law, initiative that's going to happen, and that is going to end up being something that's going to potentially drastically change those results. You have a new product line, you have a discontinued product line, you decided to change your payment terms. I mean, those are big things that can have a big impact on your forecast. And also maybe there's even economic headwinds, right? Like all of a sudden we get into a harder economic situation, your DSO is starting to climb, people are starting to get a little nervous. That changes that forecast a little bit, right? So you can change some of those assumptions in predictive models, but usually you need that human oversight to make sure that it's capturing all the right things. And also you want to make sure that, you're doing a sanity check on it, because it might tell you something crazy. And you want to make sure, is that actually crazy or did I miss something big?
So what's the advantage? You went through a lot of watch outs about using AI in cash flow forecasting. Sounds like I just shouldn't. It sounds like a headache. Why should I use it?
No, you absolutely should, because it'll help you understand patterns that you can't see, right? And like I said, you can't look at every transaction yourself. You can't look at every single, payment, every single cash receipt, even you want to look at like investing. If you have cash reserves and you're thinking about what to do with that, you're making a lot of decisions. So you want to use the data that you have to help support your decisions. It's actually an incredibly useful tool. You just have to use it, responsibly, right? And I think this is true of data in general, regardless of whether you're using AI or not. Don't be data blind. Don't be AI blind. Make sure that when you're looking at the results, when you're looking at the data, that you understand that the pieces have been set up correctly, that you understand the right assumptions, and that you know your business well enough to interpret the results. So there's absolutely huge benefits to utilizing these tools, including especially being able to identify patterns that you yourself can't see without diving into crazy analysis that would take you a very, very, very long time to put together.
Okay, so it's great for doing pattern analysis and pattern recognition on large data sets. Now, perhaps would take a very lot of effort to do, if not, probably not possible at all for a human to be able to do. That's why you would use it. But I like what you said there. You shouldn't be, just like you shouldn't be data blind. I think a lot of people can understand that, relate with that, a lot of treasurers especially, that yes, data is great, but what's behind the numbers? How do you use the numbers? Let's try and interpret the numbers, sense check the numbers, recognize that all past events do not equal future events, and that the future may hold something differently that we may know. It might be an election year, it might be a seasonality. It might be something like this that may be coming up. You might be in a city where the Olympics are happening, and that's going to be something big that's coming up. Taylor Swift might be coming through and having a concert, which is a cash flow nightmare, apparently.
Single-handedly, did she and Beyonce single-handedly send in Datarails? Not totally sure.
Correct. Exactly. So God, maybe the AI doesn't know that Taylor Swift is coming into your target market and influencing the economy locally. So you should always sense check it. I like that. Don't be AI blind. I like that. I like that as a phrase.
Yeah. I think that's a general rule, right? And it's not even just that they don't know those specific things. Sometimes the data really doesn't show the full picture. You just can't see it in the data, what is there, because you haven't looked at enough combinations of different types of data together. Like you haven't looked at it from enough angles that you missed the, very important thing. The same is going to be, it's even more amplified with AI, because at the end of the day, what's driving it? Data, right? So, and it's making assumptions based off of patterns that it's recognizing and building, forecasts based off of that. So you have to just be careful with it. Great tools to help you with your productivity, to help you see things that you otherwise couldn't see.
Awesome. Sloane, you've been mentioning at the beginning of the episode that you're not a treasury expert, but you're much more into the FP&A space, and maybe more insights here in terms of actually knowledge on the topic itself. And we'd like to dive a little bit into this, because there are definitely some interdependencies between Treasury and FP&A, and that's what we are really interested in exploring. So maybe to begin with, it's Corporate Treasury 101. We're going to make it for a very short moment, FP&A 101. Can you explain us what FP&A actually is as an acronym, and then what does it comprises?
Sure. Well, FP&A is actually huge, right? And I think it's in some companies, depending, the smaller you get, the more likely you are to have the same people who work on Treasury and FP&A, and maybe also accounting and a million other things, right? As we get into larger and larger companies, we see more of those segregations. FP&A is basically doing the full, with the exception at a large company, right? Usually Treasury is going to do the cash flow forecasting. FP&A at a large company is typically going to be a lot more focused on forecasting and budgeting, target setting for the P&L, and also doing, very intense analysis on results versus budget, actual, prior periods, those kinds of things. So it's understanding those different, things that are happening in the business, how well the business is doing or not. It's also a very, very, very crucial strategic lever within the company. So it's about looking at the financials and working with business partners to make sure that the decisions that are being made on the strategy of the company actually so it makes sense. But then, the financial world, is this actually going to is this going to be a good ROI? Is this going to get us to where we need to go? And also, it's helpful in a lot of cases. FP&A also tends to see a little bit bigger picture, because, you don't have just one business partner usually, although sometimes, really big companies, you have one business partner and then it'll roll up, but you're starting to get a view that can see a bigger picture of the business and help say, well, they're doing this over here, but this other department's doing something that's totally at odds. And, we need to figure out how to either marry the two or, change one or the other. Absolutely crucial part of any business. And even the smaller businesses, everybody needs an accountant. No matter what, you need an accountant. There's nothing you can ever do to get around that. You don't have to have a finance person, but you should have someone doing finance. You should be setting budgets. You need to understand what your cash needs are going to be. So this is where we have a lot of overlap. How are you going to fund your business? If you do have a lot of excess cash, how are you going to handle it? What type of capital investments can you make? FP&A does have a lot of overlap with Treasury that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's the interesting part, in the sense of, so FP&A stands for financial planning and analysis, right? So planning could be like, okay, what is going to happen in the future in terms of finance? But that's typically what you would expect from a treasury department. But probably more on the short term, horizon. Whereas financial planning will be much more, okay, what's the quarterly, semesterly, I'm not sure of my English here, yearly financial planning. And then corporate treasury is in charge of analyzing this at a much more granular level and rolling out throughout the year, right? Like, okay, every 2 weeks, we're going to reassess what is going to come out, go in, or the other way around. But so it's all about planning, forecasting, budgeting. So this is why you are mentioning, okay, maybe in bigger companies, you are expecting this to be done by treasury, but but smaller companies, FP&A departments might be taking over that role, and there are some huge overlap here, even when you are rolling out to bigger companies where you have like interdependencies also in terms of systems, because obviously treasury is going to look at the AP&AR system to make sure, okay, what is coming in, what is going out for the cash flow forecasting tool. So super interesting here. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point you raised, because I think that everything's related, right? So even in a larger company, FP&A and Treasury actually do need to work together. Treasury can't do anything if they don't know what's going on with the business, right? Like, you're flying blind. So how do you know how much cash you need to have at a given time if you don't know that there's going to be a huge capital expense? And then you're like, I could buy a few T-bills or whatever it is that you want to do with, your investments. And so it's very, very important for these teams to be talking together and just have a very good idea of what everybody's doing. The business shouldn't be making big plans without including treasury analysis and forecasting. But absolutely, treasury, it tends to be more focused on the short-term cash needs and cash plans, although investments are certainly, that falls squarely in like the treasury, at least in my experience, again, limited, but the companies that I've ever worked for, treasury, owned all the excess cash, which I always thought was very, very cool, but did not get involved in. That being able to handle the what decisions to make, and by the way, AI can help with all of that too, right? Because again, you're doing your forecasting. AI can help you with understanding what investments might be good as well. I'm going to say that's a little trickier, but there's there are a lot of tools that are coming out to help with making decisions on investments and, what makes sense to do with, your money. So a lot of really cool things coming out there.
Awesome. Super cool. So, and you set up quite nicely, because one thing I wanted to know was now we've talked about AI, we talked about cash flow forecasting, talking about FP&A, we always talk about treasury. Marry those together for us. So where's the intersection between the applications of AI and cash flow forecasting for FP&A and treasury? Like, what AI model could a company employ which would be relevant for both FP&A and treasury to collaborate better or to work together better?
Yeah, I don't think it would be a specific model. I think you would have everybody's going to use a model that makes sense for their particular situation in their business, or proprietary tools that have been set up with specific models. I think that you can share a lot of the technology, and just, again, the level of granularity is probably different. FP&A, when they're looking at cash, they're probably looking at it from a much bigger, further away, microscope. That's not the right word. They're looking at it from just from a much bigger vantage point. Whereas the cash, the cash management, the treasury management is really about focusing on that, understanding the details. You really, really have to understand the details. And I think in some ways, the treasury becomes, right, it's like a little bit of, you have the business partnership, right? And treasury is another business partner. So FP&A has to support in terms of, again, letting people know what needs to be put in their models, right? Here is the human element. Here is what needs to happen in your forecasting. As you look forward at cash, here's what we want to do. Can we do it, right? Like, is there a way for us to get there? So, and treasury needs to be able to take the what's happening in the business and make sure that there's a plan for the cash to happen in the bank or not, whatever the plan may be. So I think, absolutely crucial to work together. In terms of AI, the tools that are going to be utilized are extremely similar, even though the level of granularity is probably different.
Super clear. What about a really good intersection is the AP and AR departments, right? I guess between the FP&A and Treasury. What AIs? How does AI help there? So you mentioned a little bit being able to read things and like the visual aspects of AI, being able to read documents and whatnot. So how else?
Computer vision, super, super, super cool. Not relevant for FP&A, I think, too much, although I guess I can envision something kind of interesting where you're doing some sort of analysis by looking at all your invoices that you ever got or something like that. There could be something in that. I'm not aware of anybody using that today, but I think for AP in particular, using AI is such a slam dunk. I've seen it utilized, in companies, and this technology is not that new. And actually none of the technology we're talking about is that new. It's just gotten a lot of, so that's an interesting thing to talk about. So, even ChatGPT, the technology's been around for a real long time. They happen to do an incredibly great job with what they put out there. But the technology, there was no fundamental breakthrough. The breakthrough had actually been a few years earlier. I think Google is the company that introduced transformers, which is basically what a lot of these LLMs are large language models, the natural language processing AI tools that we talk about. That's where that breakthrough actually came from. But in terms of this being new, it's tried and true. I think that's it. So the technology has been around. It is very reliable. I've seen it with my own eyes operate beautifully. It's not going to catch everything, and it's you have to train these computer vision tools to help you identify what's going to come through on an invoice. But really, any documents that you're receiving from the outside, computer vision can help you work to understand those. If you have invoices, that is the perfect example, right? And it's most true for AP. But being able to pick up your PO immediately, be able to recognize, okay, it's this vendor, it's this SKU, it's, this quantity, this price, and then pull it into your system. And then from there, does it match my requisition? Does it match all of the, using those tools to help you along? To me, it feels like an absolute slam dunk. Highly recommend that folks look into it if it's within their reach. And then it becomes a data source where you remove the data entry layer. You removed a little bit of the human error, but at the same time, there's like computer error. So I don't know where we fall on the spectrum there, but I do think what you do is you free up the time to have your AP resources go after and be like, hey, what's going on? This PO, the system can help you do that automatically too. But depending on what systems you're using, but being able to have tools so they're not spending their entire day just entering data. At the end of the day, I don't know anybody who really loves doing that. Could be wrong, right? Seriously, I want to know.
Not gonna stop you here.
But I think it's one of those things you can kind of start, for the most part, eliminating from the process. It's not going to be 100%, but it's getting better and better. So computer vision is a huge place where that flows. And all of the data that's being created by AR and AP, at the end of the day, this informs what FP&A is doing, right? This is the entire, it's not the entirety, it's a huge portion of what FP&A is looking at when they're trying to understand the variance analysis. Like, oh my gosh, we are so over budget here. What the heck happened? What's the first thing they do? They dive into the transactions. They start looking at invoices. They start looking at POs. They start looking at, that's getting very, very detailed, right? But that's a lot of what the FP&A folks are going to do. They're going to start an investigation, work alongside their business partners and be like, wow, we had this thing. How did we get, what's this about it? I can't, help me understand the context of it. Though usually I will say that the best FP&A people have their pulse on the business anyway, so they're not often surprised. Everybody is always going to be surprised, they're not often surprised. But so I think this is all it's a ballet, right? We all sort of have our different pieces, AR, AP. FP&A does not exist without that. right? Because there's nothing to analyze at the end of the day. Inventory movements are interesting, but they're not the most important thing. Understanding, okay, we had a huge PPV on this for whatever reason. The vendor had a huge inflation, and it was totally different than our standard cost. This is what it is. We made the choice. We want to stay. We'll shop for another vendor, but for now we're stuck with it. Those kinds of things. That's a lot. That data is super, super important for FP&A teams to be able to uncover and understand.
On FP&A requiring to live on the pulse of the business, how would you see AI facilitating a better collaboration between Treasury, FP&A, AP and AR? The reason I'm asking because throughout our interviews that we had with Sam after more than 150 episodes, one of the things that comes the most is that Treasury is still seen as a support function, right? And you also have even very big companies where the different departments are working in silos. Yes, you might have the heads who are reporting to the CFOs, and so the treasurer is forced somehow to talk with the head of tax and the head of legal and the head of procurement whatsoever. But usually the people underneath, the people managing, using that data, coming up with the reports, are working very much in silos. Is there an area, an opportunity for AI to facilitate a better collaboration? We see there are interdependencies. Can AI enhance that?
I would tell you that an area of AI that would be very interesting to explore where collaboration is concerned, and I think is a general collaboration thing, not necessarily specific to Treasury, although, like I said earlier, I think it's very important that FP&A and Treasury work together closely. So that part of that is probably a mindset shift, right? And companies need to make specific efforts within their cultures to make sure that they're breaking down the silos and that they have teams working together. At the end of the day, the company only has a benefit to get from that. There's no con to the teams collaborating. The more information that everybody has together, and the better the FP&A team understands the cash environment when they're making strategic recommendations, right? Super important, right? So I think that's partially just a change that companies need to actually make a decision on. And it unfortunately, it means that the folks in both FP&A, Treasury, controllership need to raise their voices, right? And CFOs also need to, make an effort to make sure that all of their teams are communicating well. Where AI can help, I think, there are some really cool tools like things that can identify stuff like sentiment analysis. There's some really, really cool tools out there that the name's escaping me, but there's some, it's starting to happen, right? Where people's communications, this is a tricky thing. And this is where we get a little funny with AI and you're making a balance. And I know we've had all these conversations in social media and just data privacy in general, but giving up a little bit of your data privacy in terms of your conversations to AI, they can analyze and say, wow, we've got a lot of bad feelings, right? The AI can pick up in the tone of how people are communicating. And you can see how often people are communicating, right? So if you want to, as a company, go ahead and make an effort to do that, you actually can use tools to help support you in doing it and say, listen, we did an analysis, you don't talk to each other. Let's fix that. And it does take a bit of bravery, right? And this is where this is a comfort level thing. I think the benefits are worth it. You have to use partners that you trust with the data, that they're not going to do anything more than the sentiment analysis, all of that stuff, right? And most of the companies that are starting to put tools out there that will do this type of analysis for you, they only go up to a certain level. We're only going to identify up to, there's good feelings, bad feelings, whatever. They're not going to get into the nitty gritty. They're not going to be understanding, they have limits on what they're picking up on. So some really, really cool tools out there that can absolutely help with collaboration in general. And then I think also as a matter of process, if you're using your models together, right? If, FP&A is doing their predictive analytics, they should be working with their treasury team as well to make sure that those things are married together.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, the ethics of AI is something that I guess we haven't touched on with you or in previous conversations that we've had with some partners, and also our AI newsletter as well. It's something that's a very touchy topic overall. I think it's something that people are still figuring out. I think ethics is something you kind of figure out as a society, perhaps. And as AI becomes more mainstream, I think society will start getting towards what the right ethics for it are. But even if you just look internally in terms of privacy, convincing your employees that, oh, don't worry, we're not, yes, you need to sign this waiver that says, yes, we're going to be watching everything that you say, but it's only going to be the sentiment of what you say. So, and then there's someone be like, well, if I say something bad about my boss, is that negative sentiment on my Slack chats or my Microsoft Team chats? And then it's a touchy and slippery slope towards a bit of an authoritarian company governing.
Yeah, I totally hear where you're coming from. I think you have to have the right culture for that to work. So if you have a culture with high psychological safety, where it's not like people are monitoring you, this is like a bigger thing. And again, I think that the tools that are out there, they're being utilized only up to a certain extent. So it's not like they're not going wild and for this reason. I'm going to also say that I don't know the percentage, but companies are monitoring their employees anyway. And I would say that they're monitoring them for, I'll say not productive reasons. To me, that's not productive. It's like, I get why companies do it. I think this is one of the things where you can say, hey, like we have some data, we're trying to understand this is a problem we want to fix. It's not an individual, problem. It's a company problem, and we recognize that we want to make a change. So having the right company culture in general, by the way, in terms of collaboration, having high psychological safety is going to help that. You want to make sure that people feel comfortable and safe talking to each other. So I would, it's absolutely a big thing. And as far as AI ethics is concerned, there are a ton of organizations that are trying to address this. It's not an easy answer. And depending on the topic you're talking about with AI, may also have a very different thing. A very different, outcome in terms of what's ethical versus not. I don't think we know anything. There's not a single thing that we know on the planet that is black or white from an ethical standpoint anyway. AI just happens to be extra fuzzy right now because it's new to so many people's consciousness.
Yeah. And so you mentioned about sentiments. We did a piece from our Corporate Treasury 101 newsletter about a company called Owlin, actually, that does market sentiment analysis, but of counterparty. So that's also because you mentioned sentiment analysis, right? And I remember when reading it and saying that what they do is, and we're not sponsored by Owlin or anything like this, just very interesting use case, where they were actually scouring the internet for sentiment analysis to understand, okay, if my major banking provider with which I hold 80% of my cash, probably not a good idea, but I hold 80% of my cash, in the market, what is their sentiment? Are they favored? Are they heading towards trouble, et cetera, et cetera? And again, it goes back to those very large data sets and very large amounts of patterns, or very complex patterns, that perhaps humans, maybe you could say we have a vibe, but putting data behind it and having everything like this sort of quantifies the vibe of the market about your counterparty. That's a good way to put it. It quantifies vibe. That's a great idea of what is AI doing with sentiment?
I love that. It quantifies vibe. I think the sentiment tools are going to become even more and more important as you look at what to do with your excess cash, those types of decisions. Where you put that money matters, right? You don't want to be in a situation where you are, again, not a treasury person. I would never put 80% of my money into anything, unless I was really, really sure, but last I checked, I couldn't tell the future. So I think that definitely having more data to support the decisions you're making and understanding what direction things are going will absolutely help. Market sentiment is absolutely huge where investments are concerned. And again, like this, everything we talk about in Treasury is applicable outside. And I think that's because if you think about it, every single one of us is a mini Treasury department, right? Like we all make decisions about our own personal lives. I think that these types of tools are going to be more and more important to us all as we just move on. There's only so much data. Again, going back to it, it's like a broken record a little bit, but There's only so much data that a person can use, and you want to utilize tools to help you work through it and identify those patterns. So you can make the best decision from it.
Another application of AI I see when it comes to facilitating the collaboration between the different departments is a section of generative AI, actually. Like, I think we covered in one of our newsletter, maybe, or we didn't, I guess, I don't remember, but we talked about a treasury policy chatbot. And instead of having somebody going to the folders of the company trying to find the right folder in the intranet and then putting out the 150 pages treasury policy and finding the right section. Rather than that, you just say, hey, what's the policy when it comes to FX exposure in Latin America on this specific currency whatsoever? And then you all of a sudden have your input, right? But that could potentially work between departments as well. Like an FP&A analyst could go and now ask a question about that specific treasury policy aspect that would be so hard to get before that. Oh, okay, I understand how they think there. And the other way that we around as well, I'm not too sure of what's going on in FP&A departments, but that's the perfect example. Like, we could definitely ask a chatbot about a practice, a procedure, an SOP, whatever it is. Like, okay, how does it work there? And we would have the answer right away, allowing us for better understanding, okay, that's how they work. And it's actually, they're not being, how to say this in a polite manner, difficult. They are just applying the policy that is the guideline of the group, right? And aligned with the strategy. So that would be an interesting way of liaising the two departments.
I love that idea. Also, I would just say that in general, I think like having policy accessible via chatbot is a brilliant idea. Every company who has an intranet, or the thing with this is you have to have a company that has enough data that you can train your chatbot, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does it have to consume to be able to know the answer to that question? But if you have a good intranet, if you have a 150-page policy, oh my gosh, slam dunk, absolutely utilize that. It's probably simpler to implement than most people think. There's a whole bunch of tools out there. I've been naming specifics, but I've often dealt with building our own here at Datarails and not using other people's tools. But especially if you have a portfolio to work with, it should be pretty simple for most companies, especially most larger companies, to set up a chatbot that's easy for people to work with. Absolutely. Love it.
Awesome. So Guillaume and I, in our previous lives, both have a lot of experience in implementing tools. Not AI tools necessarily, although a couple of ones here and there, but mainly around like the process of implementation, the human challenges that come with that. I think we've touched on quite a lot already, having psychological safety, etc. like this. But then implementation, there's huge consulting fields just around implementation because it's just so difficult a lot of the time to bring change to any department. Do you have any best practices or tips for implementing AI-driven models? And I think Datarails is primarily in the cash flow forecasting area into FP&A and Treasury departments specifically, or just generally? Like, what's the implementation to the treasurers listening to this right now? What's your best tips for implementing these kind of tools?
Okay, so first off, the first thing I want to say that the biggest obstacle that you're going to get in your change management when it comes to implementing new tools, especially when it comes to AI, people get very nervous that their jobs are going away. I think there are probably some people out there that think that, although I think that's probably less and less. It's becoming obvious that's so not true, but my opinion is that that's not it. It is not going to have an impact on, at least in these applications. I don't want to speak for anything outside of these applications, since that's outside of my purview. But within the finance overview, in the finance purview, at least with the current technology, what I see is that jobs are going to be changing. So it's very important to prepare your workforces for the fact that things are going to be changing. Get comfortable with AI. I highly encourage people to just play with things. Just get your hands in there. Just do a little ChatGPT or Midjourney, whatever. Play with it. Feel a little comfortable with it. No proprietary data, but play with it. And get yourself comfortable with it. You'll see quickly that it's super cool and that it's also not going to take over the world, at least not that I can see in the near future, okay? It can't do your job for you. It needs your help. So To me, AI is actually useless without the people there to make sure, again, you want to check that the data is there. You want to make sure the assumptions are right. You have to understand those higher level strategic decisions that are being made. And the AI is not going to be able to do that. So the first thing that I would say, the first bit of advice, if you want to implement AI in your company, get folks in your company to feel comfortable with it. Don't tell them they're not going to lose their jobs, because they will not believe you, even if you have crazy psychological safety. That's just not, it's like that reverse psychology thing. Work with them and say, hey, here's how we envision it, right? We want to do X, Y, Z thing. And we need your help because we need you to validate the models. We need you to help us work through the different pieces. We need you to step up. And this is a conversation that happens a lot on the FP&A side, where I'm like, how long is your to-do list? And you never, ever, ever get through it. AI is going to start helping you spend less time on those things that are just, at the end of the day, busy admin work, and focus on the places where you're actually going to add value, right? And that's super exciting. So get people excited about the work they're not going to do. We talked about data entry, right? And that's something, I mean, yes, a lot of people do it. Let's get them working on something more interesting, right? I think most people who are doing data entry, it's fine, but I don't think they're the most, I don't know. Yeah, I could be wrong. Like I said, write to me if you disagree, but I think most people that are doing data entry, it's not their favorite thing in the world. And we can have them working on more interesting things and helping the business look at it from different directions. So that's the first step that I would take. This is an extra hurdle that you have to take with AI that you don't have to necessarily take with other tools. Good change management is always about making sure that your team feels heard, that they, if you roll in and you're like, hey, we're just doing this, people resist. And depends also on your culture. Some cultures are very into, change and progress, and they're into innovation, and other companies are very, very slow. And it's, so make your adjustments based on your culture. The slower the culture is, the longer you're going to have to take to get people comfortable with the changes that you're going to make. And at the end of the day, you want to empower your teams, right? Get them involved, help them think about ideas. How can we use AI to help us, right? We want to make this a tool that's going to, help your day out, make your life more interesting, and at the end of the day, provide more value to the company. So that would be my, advice where AI specifically is concerned.
So amazing. Yeah, indeed. Like people's game. I think I like what you said about giving people the assurance that they're not going to be replaced with AI, but also helping them upskill, right, around it. So if someone is just trained in data entry, get them to do something interesting, meaning help train them into a role that perhaps can't be as automated as easily, or is yet to be automated, let's say. And then that cycle has been running since the Industrial Revolution, right? So that makes complete sense. What about and again, the people listening are treasurers, right? Treasurers are quite practical people and risk-averse people in general. What's the right, practical tips in terms of, I don't know, infrastructure, data flow, data pipeline? What any old company can't just come in and jump right to the top of your technology roadmap and just go implement AI, right? You need to have at least maybe be off of Excel. Is that a good place to start? That your treasury shouldn't be in Excel anymore first, and it should be in some sort of structured database, or how would you say it?
Depends what you mean by off of Excel. And as a Datarails person, I'm going to be a little biased here because we utilize Excel as a tool, but you actually maintain data in your database. So it's a little bit more complex. I personally love Excel. I think it's a fantastic tool. I think first off, the first rule, this is true of any implementation. It's extra true when it comes to AI. Garbage in, garbage out. If you are having a computer look through your data and try to help make decisions and your data's a mess, well, guess what? Your results are going to be even worse. So make sure, and this is, I think it's true always, you want to have good data hygiene. You want to make sure you have good processes in place. Implementing AI is not a magic bullet to fix your data issues. If you haven't figured out as an organization how to do that, focus on that first. Focus on that first before you do anything anyway. So make sure that you have good data to work with, period. So I think there's first off, I can't speak to specific treasury tools. I've never used them aside from evaluating like automated bank reconciliation via SAP S/4HANA. Aside from that, and that's only one small piece of it. So I don't have the expertise to talk about treasury tools specifically. However, what I can say outside of Datarails, right? You can't use Datarails for treasury. So if you utilize a platform, and I'll talk within the realm of Datarails, but what you would need before Datarails, right? So anybody needs to have an ERP, right? You need to have some way to gather data. I don't think you need, I would say the more data you have, the more useful AI is for you, right? Because at a certain day, if you only have a few transactions, everything you need to make the pros and cons as to whether it's worth it for your business, whether it'll actually enhance your business. The bigger your business, the more likely the answer is yes. And if you just have, a very, very, very small business, $1 million a year, you're probably okay skipping it, although I'm sure you can still find utility in it. You need to make sure that you have good data hygiene. You need to make sure that you have a way, accurate ways to measure your data. You have good visibility into your AR, your AP, especially for Treasury, right? And your capital, planning, all of that. And then after that, you can use tools like Datarails. There are other tools out there. Again, I'm not as familiar from a Treasury perspective, so I don't want to comment there. But basically where you can start databasing your information, being able to pull your information for long periods of time so that you can actually start building those patterns. And if you do, also, again, if you have, for example, if you wanted to do the chat bot on your policies, right, you have to actually have the corpus of your policies first to be able to work with that. But being able to have access to your data, and also sometimes the smaller your business, right, the more likely you are to have a tool like an ERP that doesn't connect to anything. Again, you have to make those decisions. Do you upgrade your ERP so that you can get access to your data and, get it out of that system? Are you using a proprietary system that, for whatever reason, the programmers didn't program it and they're not here anymore and we don't know how to deal with it? You got to make those kinds of decisions for your business because you want to look forward, right, and make those plans. If you do use a tool like Datarails, you can take what's flowing out in your ERP, and if you have even if you have models that you're using in Treasury, you can database what's happening in those models so that you can pull them when you look at other models and you make comparisons and do all sorts of really, really cool things. Again, I'm super biased when it comes to Datarails, but it's a really, really cool tool that would help anybody in FP&A or Treasury be able to make better models. You can pull your actuals in very, very easily. And from there, you can start doing some different analysis. It is important to say that for Datarails, the predictive analytics, which I've talked about so much on this episode, are upcoming. They're not in our current tool because we want to make sure we get it right. We feel very strongly about that. We're all like finance people. So the numbers being, reliable, very important to us. So it's something that is on our product roadmap, but not in the current AI tool set that we allow customers access to currently. But yeah, make sure your data is great. Make sure you have a system that you actually can connect to it. And then I'll have to actually defer to you both on what actually else there could be from a Treasury perspective. For me, I just see data, right? So you need to pull in all of the different places that you might. Having access to your bank statements is actually probably a good thing, which, by the way, if you don't have electronic bank statements, you probably utilize computer vision if you have a bank for whatever reason that doesn't want to cooperate with you there. You have to determine whether the bank's worth your buck, how many bank accounts you have, all that kind of thing, how many transactions you have. But those are the kinds of decisions you should take before you implement AR.
Super interesting. Thank you so much. I think you've already started going into this one, but take us into what Datarails does exactly. Like, what is Datarails? What is their offering? And perhaps, I understand perhaps it's got quite a big FP&A swing on it, but we do know treasurers using it for treasury departments also. That's kind of how we got interested in your tool through a treasurer. So how can Datarails be used for treasury departments?
Listen, how many people listening use Excel to model things out? Okay, you might use other tools to model things out as well.
Excel, maximum Power BI.
So you're using tools to help you generate different models, scenarios, try and understand, make the decisions about what you're going to do with your cash, and how you're, whatever, are you going to invest it? Does this have the right ROI? Is it not the right ROI, but does it have the right, the right cash trajectory for you? Excel is a tool that we inherently believe in. There've been, for many, many years, people have talked about its impending death, and yet here it is. And the reason is that it's an incredibly versatile, flexible tool. So no matter what your business is, Excel can work with your business, because guess what? It can be whatever you want it to be. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Now, Datarails basically takes, and we can integrate with systems. If you had ERPs or other systems that you're utilizing, we can integrate with those systems. We can also use manual uploads of data, and we basically bring it into our Datarails system, where we can systematize things like data manipulations, your ETL processes, and make sure that whatever your data set needs to look like, at the end of the day, you have a clean database that you can then use to query and using Datarails. We have an Excel add-in where you can access things via formula. You can build all sorts of crazy, amazing models. I have had conversations with customers that are, just getting access to Datarails, and like the twinkling in their eyes starts happening when they're like, "Oh, I could model that out. That's so cool." So basically, you're able to have the power of the database right within your Excel file. Without it creating like a huge, if anybody's used Hyperion in the past, I don't know how often that pops up in Treasury, you end up with a huge data set in your Excel file, and it's super great, but your Excel file takes about 5 years to run. So instead of that, you actually have direct access to your Datarails and database via the formulas, tables. We also have a web environment where you can do dashboards. You can, think about scenario analysis. We also have AI tools, including our FP&A Genius, which is where you can, as I alluded to earlier, you can ask the Genius questions, right? So, how do I guess you could say, how's my cash trending this year? And other questions where it's going to pop up and give you a graphical explanation as well as a textual explanation. And you'll get that answer very, very quickly, much faster than I think even the fastest Excel gurus could do it, though I haven't tested that out yet. It's a really, really cool tool. I, of course, am an extremely biased, so take it all for someone who's very prejudiced towards Datarails. I really like working with it because it allows me the flexibility and freedom to model as I like, while still having access to my data and not creating crazy Excel sheets that crash every 6 seconds. So that's my piece. And I actually do think from a treasury perspective, because you do model so often, you're utilizing that prior history of data, actually would be very, very useful for most treasury accounts.
Yeah. And actually, to touch upon some of the points you mentioned, really related to treasury, like have visibility on your cash. Typically, you mentioned electronic bank statements earlier. That's typically something you could, let's say, extract in a CSV format, put it in an Excel database, and then create models around this, having proper cash positioning visualization tools. And then you can extend it to cash flow forecasting, right? And here goes the AI aspect of it, when you can leverage what you have been doing in your Excel models and powered by the Datarails, and then input some type of AI intelligence there, and just make sure to have a proper cash flow forecasting tool that is not only predictive, but also enabled and powered by AI. Super interesting. So is there any other future developments in AI that you foresee that could further transform treasury operations? And maybe making the link with Datarails developments, are you working on some stuff that could be coming without revealing any sensitive information, I see, I see that might be a sensitive topic, but like in general, like make us dream. What could be the application of AI in the future? Maybe starting from this point of Datarails and then expanding it further.
Well, so as I alluded to earlier, Datarails is going to be adding predictive analytics functionality, as well as a lot of like very accessible what-if analysis, which actually would be, I think, very relevant tool on Treasury, right? Like, what if?
Stress test.
I don't know. Yeah. What if we changed our payment terms? Like, what does that look like, right? If all other things are equal, being able to get quick answers like that without having to, spend too much time on it, I think is going to be pretty awesome. So those are things that are going to be coming to Datarails in the future. Outside of Datarails, overall developments in AI, I think my suspicion on what is going to be next that will be the most game-changing, I should put a bet with this on someone somewhere. Autonomous agents, I don't know how much you've talked about that with your listeners. I personally see that as the future of AI. And autonomous agents are basically where you have an AI agent, right? And they, you sort of give it a task, and then it goes and figures out all the other tasks it needs to do to figure out how to complete that task. So you can say, hey, I want to research blah, 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 blah. And it's going to be like, okay, so I know I have to, so here's the first step. It breaks it up into different steps and says, okay, so I have to research, part X first and understand that. And once I understand that, then I can do this, and that's this, and then this, and then this. We do have autonomous agent tools right now. The jury so far says that they're not very good. But I think that that's the most interesting application that I can think of, because it opens up an entire world of AI. I want to say decision-making, but it's not quite decision-making. I am not in the camp that thinks that, well, I don't know. This is like an interesting, we could get a very theoretical debate about the sentience or not of AI and whether that's possible. But I think the future of AI is going to be about these agents, because it is going to be about doing complex tasks and wider, more general tasks than what we have today, which is very, you can get good answers, but you have to be very, very specific about what you're looking for. It's narrow. It's not a one look at it. That's my suspicion on where the next big developments in AI are going to come from.
Super good. Yeah, I think autonomous agents are an interesting one. I think, there's trust element still remains with them a little bit, right? To let an AI go off and make its own decisions and everything like that is starts sounding a bit Terminator-y. So it's
I think there are serious ethical concerns and guardrails that we all need to think about. I think that in the basic format, autonomous agents are probably not anywhere near the Terminator, view of AI. But it doesn't mean that, in the near future, I don't want to say in the future.
Have you seen what Boston Dynamics is doing? Like, you merge that with that, and then, Sarah Parker's under threat again. So, like, it's
Sarah Connor, no?
Sarah Connor. Sloane, this one.
Those, in all reality, though, you are going to see robotics. And first of all, Boston Dynamics is using very sophisticated AI already. That is how the robots are doing what they do. They're combining the robotic, the mechanical engineering and the robotics pieces of it, and electrical engineering alongside software that is making decisions about how to stay stable when getting knocked over and how to do a flip and all of this stuff. Boston Dynamics.
Maybe less relevant to AI, to Treasury at the moment. Super cool.
I think so, yeah.
So we can have a conversation on a separate podcast about that another time. Awesome. Sloane, thank you so much for your time today. Any final thoughts or insights you'd like to share on the topics we've discussed, or anything else people should know about AI in FP&A, Treasury, the combination between the two, or just about Datarails that you'd like to share?
I'm going to say that I think that the most important thing that anybody should walk away with today, if you haven't explored AI, start playing with it, start getting comfortable with it. The truth of it is, and I've mentioned this on some other conversations that I've had, think of it in the way that you think of Excel. There was a Treasury, there was a finance before Excel, and there was after Excel. AI is going to be similar. It's going to take a while for it to start getting introduced, but it provides a tremendous utility and companies are going to take advantage of it. Upskill yourself, get comfortable with it, know its limitations, know when you can use it and when you shouldn't use it, right? That's my biggest, honestly, that's the one thing if anybody walks away with today, I think that's what they should walk with. Start learning, start feeling comfortable with it. The world is going to change, although I think not as drastically as some folks that, we're told, at least in the current world. But lots of things are going to change, and the way that you do things, the way that you approach things are going to start to shift. So get comfortable with it. It's not that scary. It's super interesting. It's going to enhance your life if you use it properly. It's one thing.
Amazing. Sloane, thank you so much for coming on the show. If people would like to know more about you, Datarails, what you guys do, where should they go?
You can always reach us on our website, datarails.com. Reach out on LinkedIn. More than happy to chat with folks. And thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot, Sloane. We'll put all the links in the description. Thank you so much for coming on the show.